Hey everyone, Pastor George here with today's Bible study. And today in Bible study, we looked at Jonah chapter 4. Now, I know I've preached through Jonah, but we've never done a study through it. So, what I'm going to start with today is just a little bit of an introduction to the book of Jonah, because you really can't go to the fourth chapter without knowing what's taken place. So, just to remind everyone, I'm sure many people know the story, especially the fish part of the story. That's like the most famous part. But Jonah is a prophet. He's in the northern kingdom of Israel. This is in the 700s BC. And he gets a call from God to go to Nineveh, which has become a very important city recently. This is not what the text says, but it's just some historical background, which you're going to get more of in a little bit, which is the capital of the Assyrian Empire. And Jonah does not want to go. He flees. He gets on a ship going to a place called Tarshish. There's debate about where that might be, anywhere from somewhere in modern day Turkey to Spain. These are kind of different proposed locations for this place. In any case, he gets on the boat to leave to go there, which is very far away, right? And that's when the whole hubbub where God sends a storm, people throw him overboard. He has to be thrown overboard. He's eaten by the fish. Chapter 2 is where Jonah sings a song in the belly of a fish, and then the fish spits him out onto dry land, and he goes to Nineveh. And then chapter 3 describes what he does in Nineveh, where he preaches to the Assyrians and tells them to repent, and he really doesn't say anything. It's just repent, kind of basically it. And what happens is they do, right? It actually melts their hearts, and they stop, and they put on a sackcloth and ashes, and they repent everywhere from the king downward. And this leads us into the fourth chapter that we read today. And so, what is in the fourth chapter? Well, the fourth chapter is Jonah being very mad that God relents from sending destruction on Assyria, and actually contains him kind of hoping that he does. So you'll notice at the beginning of this, he leaves the city and he goes and he kind of sits on a hilltop where he makes a shelter for himself, and he's kind of waiting to see if the Lord is going to destroy Assyria, and actually describes Jonah's feelings about this. It says that he saw it as evil, right? That God wouldn't do this. And he saw that God relented from it. And so why does he feel that way? Well, this is this little slideshow I put together for this morning's class, and I wanted to, or rather this morning's study, and I wanted to share it here too. Why not? It's not going to look as nice because it's a screen recording or whatever, but I think it'll be a helpful one. So just here it is. It's my presentation entitled "Why Jonah Was Scared." An incredibly brief and non-scholarly introduction to Assyrians, as in why was he scared that he didn't want to go to Nineveh in the first place, and now why is he mad that the Assyrians weren't destroyed? All right, so this is going to be really brief, but I just want you guys to understand this, because I think knowing who the Assyrians are is key to understanding what's going on in the book of Jonah, showing God's character, and also maybe sympathizing with Jonah a little bit, but also understanding how great God's love and mercy are. All right, so probably don't know too much about the Assyrians, right? This is the Neo-Assyrian Empire. This is obviously not what they called it at the time. You can actually see right there the little orange area. That is the Assyrian region proper. That's where they're from. You can see the city of Nineveh, which they're originally kind of headquartered in Ashur, because it would be like Ashura. That's really how you would say Assyrian. But Ashur is that city in the southern part of Assyria, and they end up moving their capital to Nineveh. Kind of becomes a bigger deal. Doesn't really matter to us all the details, right? But you can see it includes a lot of areas. Now, most of this is not like thinking today where it's like these are border territories. It's not like the later Roman Empire. A lot of this is client kings and things like that, right? So that's what's going on in Jerusalem and other places, right? Is that like they're not a part of it in the sense that there are Assyrians posted there and stuff like that, but they all pay tribute, and Assyria offers them protection and things like that. Okay, just wanted to make this clear. This is it at its height. See, it got all the way into Egypt. All right, so the royal title. So I just wanted to see like what the Assyrians thought about themselves, and this is the name of Sennacherib. Sennacherib is actually a really important leader. We'll see why in a little bit. But this is what his title was in some records that we found. Sennacherib, the great king, the mighty king, king of the universe, king of Assyria, king of the four corners of the world, favorite of the great gods, the wise and crafty one, strong hero, first among all princes, the flame that consumes the insubmissive, who strikes the wicked with a thunderbolt. You can also see over there, these are called reliefs. We'll see more of those in a second. Things on the walls that were in palaces. And this is the Assyrians sieging. You can see they actually have a very primitive battering ram and siege tower there, which they were the first ones to really master. So pretty impressive from that thing. Now, well, what did they show you? All right, so this is things that would be in the palace. So when you would go there, you would see these on the walls. So basically, you can say it's propaganda. You could say it's the what they want you to take away, right? And so this is from a battle at a place called Lachish. And you can see in this room, they kind of have it splayed around. And you might say, Pastor George, I don't care about any of this. Too bad, right? And this is why you should care. Later, when Sennacherib, king of Assyria, and all his forces were laying siege to Lachish, he sent his officers to Jerusalem with the message for Hezekiah, king of Judah, and for all the people of Judah who were there. That comes from 2 Chronicles. Now it came to pass in the 14th year of King Hezekiah that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. Isaiah 36. So just a reminder that this is a part of biblical history. So whether you care about history or not, it's important because we actually see correspondence between the Bible and history here, which is really interesting. So anyway, this is him in this relief, right? And he's sitting there, and it says, Sennacherib, king of the universe, king of Assyria, sits on the throne, and the spoils of Lachish are paraded before him. This is another interesting image. You can see people being taken into captivity there. Those two guys are being flayed alive. That means where you separate the skin from the muscle. So it's a absolutely incredibly torturous way to kill someone. And this is what the Assyrians would do to people who did not surrender. Here you can see a bunch of Jewish families going off into exile, because this is also something they would do. They would move people around. This is the thing that Assyrians love to do. This is impalement. So they would take people and put their bodies on pikes and impale them to show their strength, right? So this is a very intense thing to do. And this is, I think, the picture that sums it up best, which is the banquet of Ashurbanipal. I've talked about this one before. But Ashurbanipal is the king. He's over there on the right over there, sitting, lounging. His wife, or a queen, we're not really sure what, is sitting there with him. And if you follow his eyesight, so if you go to the king and you go to the left all the way, you're going to notice a head over in the corner hanging on a hook on a pole. And that's the king of I want to say it's Edom, I believe it is. It's one of the places near Jerusalem, actually. And he's looking at this guy's head as he's feasting. And that might be, there's debate about the woman. It could be that guy's wife. And in that case, you get the idea of what he's communicating there. So I bring all of this up, right? Because this is all incredibly important when it comes to talking about Jonah, right? Why does Jonah want this place destroyed? Well, they are a very brutal empire. They treat people really, really not great when they conquer them. Now, some scholars will say, well, this is in line with the time, things like that, right? But I think, like, from the position of a lot of people, and granted, we don't have a ton of records, so, the Assyrians were not always considered the greatest. They didn't have maybe the reputations that later empires that would come have in a positive sense, even though they kind of got the ball rolling in a lot of different ways. The Assyrians themselves were very, very much a power that people feared and hated for their brutality, the things that they would do, and the fact that they seemed to take revel in it, that this was something that they identified themselves with. Of course, other nations would do these types of things, but the Assyrians in particular like to identify themselves as these brutal kind of leaders. And so Jonah, who knows what they've been doing, knows that they've done stuff like this in the past, does not want to go to them. He doesn't want them to repent. He wants God to hold them accountable for everything they've done. Now, he is frustrated by the fact that they did not do that. And he is mad at God. Now, one of the interesting things here that this puts into perspective is who is kind of the active force in this passage or in this story, right? Who's the one that gets to call the shots? It's not Jonah, it's God. And this is a pretty amazing thing, right? Especially if you take into account the grand title that I read a few minutes ago, that the king of Assyria believed he was king of the universe. And this is not just a cynical thing. This is kind of baked into the kind of the religious atmosphere at the time, that the king was also a priest, and a very important one, and was divine in a lot of ways, usually tracing his heritage back to a god or goddess or something like that. So the fact that he bends over and repents and turns to God, and the fact that God has that control and could destroy Assyria easily, is a really challenging notion just to the idea of kingship at that time and who's in charge, especially God versus government. But it's also difficult for Jonah, who thinks that God's justice is too merciful, right? And this goes back to our study in Exodus. Jonah actually quotes in this passage the part of Exodus that we read. It's one of the most quoted passages in the Old Testament, where it says, "I'm a God abounding in steadfast love and mercy, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love." You know that section. And it goes on to talk about, "But to those who do not, I will hold them accountable for 10 generations," things like that. We talked about how that kind of is difficult. But you'll see here that Jonah quotes that first part and is upset that that's part of God's character. He wants God to just bring immediate justice down on the Assyrians, but God doesn't. And God points out to Jonah that Jonah is, he cares about this plant that God made, but he doesn't even care about all the lives that are in Asher, or Nineveh, excuse me, and God does. And and that's a pretty important statement, because again, we are sometimes led to believe that the Old Testament God only cares about the chosen people. That's not true, right? That he makes a covenant with Abraham to be a blessing to the nations, and this is the way that you kind of see that worked out in the Old Testament, and ultimately you see that worked out in Jesus. But the thing to note, again, kind of with a study that I'm going to do later in Lent, is that God is the one at the center of the story, and that makes Jonah really upset, and it can make us upset too. But we have to remember that God's justice is greater than our understanding, and He's been merciful to us, and so we must allow Him to be merciful to others, even if it's really hard for us to see that in the moment. But yeah, anyway, that's what we talked about today. I hope you guys found that interesting. I can't believe I kept that presentation to only like 2 or 3 minutes, whatever it was. That really is a record for me. In any case, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and I'll see you tomorrow for an episode of A New Thing. Peace out.